I'm Tom Davies, and this is Collecting Stories, American Art. This segment focuses on the attempts of artists over the last century and a half to capture the beauty, activities, and moods of women. Richard Miller was among the finest and most sensitive at portraying that special moment of privacy. The quest still remains elusive. Francis Coates Jones specialized in figural, floral, and genre painting. After receiving extensive training in Europe, he returned to America in 1881 and opened a studio in New York with his brother, Hugh Bolton Jones, a landscape painter who we recently discussed in the previous session on sunsets. The collecting story behind this piece is filled with lessons to be learned. Auction environments are places where one should pay attention and avoid all distractions. They do move swiftly. I attended an auction and had interest in this picture when I noticed a well-known high roller dealer from New York enter with 3 or 4 attractive young ladies in his company. I knew he had interest in this artist and could knock me right out of the building if he wished. The bidding commenced. I bid twice. A brief pause, the hammer fell, and the piece was mine. Some minutes later, I went out to the lobby for a breath of fresh air. The dealer approached me, clearly agitated, and forcefully asked me if I would sell him the picture right now. I don't like being pushed, and I declined. He pressed and said he'd offer me $1,000 more. Then I paid for it, and again, I said no. His face softened, and now he said, please. He was bidding for a valued client who had authorized twice what I paid for the painting. How could he go back and explain it sold for half of what the client was prepared to pay, and he didn't get it? My response was, sorry, but this is an auction. Don't bring an admiring bevy of young ladies and get distracted. Pay attention. That's why you're here. Besides, it's for my wife, and sometimes this is a strategically important consideration. Considered a strong advocate of Impressionism today, it's hard to believe that J. Alden Weir was disgusted by his first exposure to this type of paintings when he first saw it in France in the mid-1870s. He much preferred academic, figure, and still life subjects. Returning to the U.S. in 1883, he purchased a farm near Cascade. Weir's almost total conversion to Impressionist landscape painting resulted from an exhibition of this style of work that he saw in New York in 1886, more than a decade after seeing it first in Paris. This earlier work in watercolor reveals his strong academic painting skills and was exhibited at the Whitney Museum in 1942. His conversion to modern influences was reflected in his supporting the famous Armory Show of 1913, revealing the most revolutionary modern art from Europe, including this, the iconic Marcel Duchamp Nude descending a staircase. Weir has left a positive and long-lasting influence on American art, which continues to this day through Weir Farm. The previous work by Coates Jones and Weir look pretty good together. Osbert Loomis was born in Windsor, Connecticut, and is listed in reference material as a portrait painter. Obviously a well-educated man, as a Yale graduate in 1836, he went on to be a founder of Loomis Chaffee School. After studies with Samuel F.B. Morse, president of the National Academy and inventor of the Morse Code, it's kind of an interesting and unique skill set, Loomis chose to start his career as a portrait painter in Charleston, South Carolina in 1836. From 1844 to 1862, he lived in Havana, Cuba, where he became the most esteemed portrait painter in the city. With his return to America and settling in New York City, this piece, entitled Sunday Out, 1870, was likely painted up north. There is a remarkably subtle quality to this young girl. At first glance, she appears to be an upper-class person, dressed rather elegantly. Study her surroundings. The slant ceiling suggests a cramped garret. A religious image is tacked to the wall over her bed, and likely her rosary beads are hanging from the picture. The drop leaf table has several items on it that are chipped, and the window drape is loosely tied to a nail in the wall. The young lady, probably Irish Catholic, is employed as a domestic servant and is preparing to leave for Sunday church, wearing the finest dress and hat that she owns. Although this is a small painting, it portrays a sensitive and perceptive narrative. This elegant image of a young lady seated on a park bench is a two-part story. The artist, Edwin Austin Abbey, and the somewhat puzzling circumstances in which I obtained this piece. Abbey was among the best-known illustrators and later painters and muralists of the late 19th century. Trained in Philadelphia, he had a relationship with Harper Publishing Company, which sent him to England in 1878, where Abbey secured numerous illustration assignments, often of Shakespeare plays. All these works were in pen and ink. Abbey became a permanent fixture in London art world, and friendships with artists like Sargent. Abbey probably began to realize that to achieve greatness, he'd have to work in oils. With Sargent's strong encouragement, Abbey began painting in oils at age 40. He received prestigious commissions like the murals in the Boston Public Library and the New York Racquet and Tennis Club. King Edward VII declared him the official court painter of the English coronation. Always considering himself an American painter, upon his passing in 1911, his wife willed 2,000 of his works to Yale University, where the vast majority of Abbey's body of work resides today. On one of my extended lunch hours, this piece was discovered in a very pricey Madison Avenue gallery. The premises was being renovated, and a lot of lesser or slow-moving stock was being stored on the top floor, probably to be dumped into an auction somewhere. This was years before Antiques Roadshow, where everybody expects the twin sister of the Mona Lisa to be in their attic. Adhering to the one man's trash is another man's treasure doctrine, I wrangled a trip to the top floor. There it was, unframed, quite dirty, but clearly a knockout. Repressing my excitement, I asked the price of the whoever painted it picture, and for $100, I rescued this beautiful young lady from the auction block. One of America's most dynamic, penetrating, and forthright painters, as well as creative and inspiring teachers, a painter's painter, is how the artist Charles Hawthorne was described. The son of a Maine sea captain, Hawthorne developed a deep respect for the harsh life of men who made their living on the sea. He frequently portrayed them in major works with the figure staring directly at the viewer, telling him, "This is a struggle, not for normal people." After Hawthorne finished studies at the Art Students League in New York, he became the assistant instructor at the prestigious William Merritt Chase Summer School in Shinnecock, Long Island. When Chase left the school, Hawthorne was not offered the directorship as expected. He departed in 1899 and formed his own school in Provincetown, Cape Cod, which lasted for 30 years and became among the most coveted teaching institutions in the company. He taught his adoring students to be bold, go out like a savage, as if paint was just invented. Hawthorne was fascinated by the people of P-Town as subjects for his extraordinary paintings, sea captains, fishermen, and the ladies that basically held these families together. He was preoccupied with finding beauty in the ordinary, commonplace, and even the ugly. His string of awards, prizes, and museum representations were staggering. At first glance, this portrait of a young lady of P-Town seems to contradict what's just been said about Hawthorne. It appears upscale, high fashion. Look more closely. She is starkly plain, absent jewelry, makeup, and probably wearing the best dress she owns. Her beauty is captured by the artist in the porcelain-like quality of her skin tones and the pride of her posture. Fairly rarely does an artist live to witness his own stellar reputation. Charles Hawthorne did. When you begin studying art at 10 years old, you can become really good, really young. This is the second Richard Miller we're looking at. The first was the lovely young lady in a small rowboat in Giverny, France. The pond was where Monet painted his famous lily pad series. Miller spent 16 years in France, much of it in Giverny, and often socializing with Claude Monet. Raised in St. Louis, Miller began as an artist reporter for the St. Louis Dispatch until a scholarship sent him to France in 1898. Miller's early work in France reflected the Barbizon influence, which was darker and somewhat somber. But his natural affinity for strong color and rich brushwork developed rapidly until his departure back to America in 1914 because of the impending war. Miller became the acknowledged leader of the Anglo-American colony of painters in France. He received France's highest accolade, Knight of the French Legion of Honor, earning numerous gold medals during his 16-year stay. With a rare hand across the ocean occurred when the French government acquired his work for the Luxembourg Museum. After a brief period in Laguna, California, Miller settled permanently in Provincetown, where this remarkable photo shows him painting an interior scene similar to the piece that we're looking at. Miller voiced his opinion, quote, "Art's mission is not literary or telling of a story, but decorative, conveying a pleasant optical sensation. Nobody splashed color, light, and reflection like his sun-filled interiors." Great artists with colorful personalities generate a lot of press. The youngest and arguably the most gifted pure painter of the urban-focused Ashcan school was Everett Shinn. The young Shinn is seen here on the left, along with the godfather of the movement, Robert Henry, and another major figure, John Sloan. Many descriptions can be found by critics of the day: brilliant, unconventional, complicated, eccentric. Another description: brash, flamboyant, who went through a series of marriages and divorces. Shinn, like the other members of the Ashcan school, got his start as a reporter-illustrator at the Philadelphia Press newspaper. Here he quickly honed his skills at observation and rapid execution of major images that he painted. Shinn departed for New York around 1897, as did the other members of the group, and together they gravitated to painting the often gritty side of the crowded city life, which earned them the term Ashcan School. Nothing was off limits: gin joints, street vendors as seen here, flop houses, homeless derelicts, etc. Shinn soon found himself actually more attracted to uptown living, and especially the bright lights of the theater. No other American artist captured the spirit of the stage, the heat of the footlights, excitement of the audience, the musicians in the orchestra pit, better than Everett Shinn. In his own words, he had, quote, "lost interest in people sleeping under bridges." His skill with pastel was unmatched. The press called him the American Degas. He himself acted on the stage whenever he could and was an amateur playwright. This piece is quintessential Everett Shinn, full of action and movement. Dancing Before the Lights was executed in 1930, at the height of Shinn's career. And of course, this portrayal of the female is polar opposite to those that we've been looking at. This extraordinarily exuberant Spanish dancer has been portrayed by the artist Harry Humphrey Moore in roughly 1870 during one of his lengthy stays in Seville. Harry Humphrey Moore was a close friend, traveling and painting companion of the great Thomas Eakins, who recommended him to study in Paris. The most important academic teacher in Paris was Jean-Léon Gérôme, with whom Moore studied. At his departure, Gérôme wrote, "I am proud of having been your professor." So impressed with the incomparable John Singer Sargent having viewed a group of Moore's paintings done in Japan in the 1880s, Sargent said, "Never saw such exquisite technique." Moore traveled extensively from Europe to the Mid and the Far East. Moore's fame also extended to the ladies. He was known for his affairs with upper-class European ladies, ultimately marrying a Polish countess. Consider this. Harry Humphrey Moore was born a deaf mute. Thomas Eakins learned sign language just to be able to communicate with him. Moore was a pallbearer at Eakins' funeral. When an artist is so highly regarded by his peers, why has he all but vanished from current consciousness? Although he occasionally painted in America, as this street scene in New Orleans, Moore basically committed his professional life to living abroad, with only occasional trips back to America. At his passing in 1926, his studio in Paris, with all his work, was closed to the public by his wife. At the outbreak of World War II, prior to his wife's deportation to a concentration camp, his artwork was gathered up, concealed in ashes, and hidden in garbage cans. It remained undiscovered until 1948, and it was painfully slow to work its way back to America. From a career perspective, Moore spent too much time overseas, neglected his home country, and his reputation suffered for it. However, it seems Harry Humphrey Moore had a hell of a life instead. It's hard to tell which was right. Kent, Connecticut, located in the Litchfield Hills on the Housatonic River, became one of our state's 6 art colonies, more than in any other state in the country. George L. Nelson settled into the area in 1919 and became an important figure in the establishment of the Kent Art Association in 1923. Nelson had undergone extensive and rigorous training in Europe, as was the practice for an aspiring portrait painter. During his long career, Nelson completed 800 portraits, became a National Academician, and was the president of the Kent Art Association from 1954 to 1968. Nelson's commitment to painting the figure was matched only by his love of flowers, which often became the subject of his masterful still lifes. He had a world-class garden from which he sourced fresh flowers. On occasion, he would combine the figure with flowers in his composition. I was minimally familiar with Nelson when I visited the area and met a longtime resident who had been researching the region and discovered the Nelson estate. I had the good fortune of reviewing roughly 100 works, learning a great deal about the artist, and having the opportunity to acquire this early example, painted in 1910 when the artist was just 23 years old. Personally, I've seen nothing else as sensitive and intimate a portrayal of a young woman by this artist. I feel it is his masterpiece. Many of the most thoughtful and sensitive paintings of women endeavor to capture a moment of privacy. The subject must appear to believe they are alone. No one is peering in on them. It is artist as spy, revealing a sentiment, an act, an emotion the subject would not wish to share. This is often achieved by never positioning the subject's head onto the viewer. Avoid eye contact. The artist, Arthur Meltzer, has achieved this moment of privacy in The Blue Dress, executed in 1921. Meltzer was a member of the very active art colony in New Hope, Pennsylvania, and throughout Bucks County. The region began attracting painters at the turn of the century, offering picturesque landscape and close proximity to the major markets of Philadelphia and New York. Meltzer was trained at the Pennsylvania Academy of Fine Arts and was the youngest of the original founders of the New Hope colony. Although this hardy group of artists were renowned for their rugged landscape painting, often in winter, Meltzer was uniquely versatile. In addition to his brilliant landscapes, he was an equally gifted still life, figure, and portrait painter as well. I saw this piece in a New York gallery in 1982, and frankly was unfamiliar with the artist, nor did I realize he was still alive and painting at 89 years old. An exchange of letters with the Philadelphia Gallery confirmed the artist still remembered the work, saying it was painted in 1920 or 21. His remarkably long career, living till 96 years old, was shared with his equally talented artist wife of more than 60 years, Paulette Van Rokens. Here we see the artist pursuing a different mood than in the previous two works, one of quiet reflection and a moment of privacy. Perhaps the artist working outside, plein air, contributes to an image of joy, walking outdoors, in nature on a bright, sunshiny day, and if the figure has a pet dog, all the better. This second piece captures a moment of thought, perhaps reflection, as the young lady composes a letter. This is a favored composition among artists, especially with Scandinavian aesthetics, with an open window and light source in the background, placing the figure in partial shadow. The artist, Edward Dufner, got his start at the Buffalo Fine Art Academy, where he studied for a number of years. Dufner worked numerous illustration jobs until earning a scholarship in 1893 to the Art Students League in New York. In 1898, he departed for Europe, where he met up with the great figure painter Richard Miller, whose work we've seen. Dufner said he had taken private lessons from the arguably most renowned artist of the day, James McNeill Whistler, but this was often disputed by scholars. Years after his passing, in 1957, an indomitable researcher found letters between Dufner and Whistler in the files of the Smithsonian that validated the artist's claims. Louis Betts was an exceptionally successful and in-demand portrait painter, not only in this country, but in London, Amsterdam, Paris, and Madrid. Betts was born in Little Rock and maintained close ties with the Midwest. The extraordinary quality of his work is reflected in his frequently exhibiting portraits in major national venues and winning prizes strictly for their artistic merits alone. Most portraits remain with the sitters and are never really seen in public exhibitions. This pair of paintings were done in old lime at one of the many garden parties at the Florence Griswold House. Betts was not a member of the colony, and it is not known when or how often he visited, but his two most important paintings are larger versions of these scenes. One is in the Montclair Museum. Interestingly, when pictures appear at auction or in galleries and are positioned as a pair, the implication is they should never be separated, meaning you should buy them both. Well, I have knowingly fallen for this on occasion. I will say I do recognize the sense of freedom and spontaneity that the artist obviously felt, no longer restricted by the demands of portraiture. As an aside, Betts was also an accomplished violinist and an avid fisherman, in addition to being an internationally recognized portrait and figure painter. This artist, Harry Townsend, was also a member of Silvermine and a resident of Norwalk. Multi-talented, he worked in oil, watercolor, block print, engravings, and etchings. During World War I, he was commissioned into the American Expeditionary Forces to illustrate the daily lives of the doughboy. Many of his drawings and sketches of the dignitaries at the Versailles Peace Conference now reside at the Smithsonian. This piece is a bit of a departure from typical Silvermine artists. It is entitled The Glass, and it captures the essence of a quiet moment, privacy, and a young woman in her boudoir. It is, as I said earlier, artist as spy, a very private and unseen by others moment. One cannot address women as a subject in art without acknowledging the centuries-old tradition of painting the nude figure. Images of the female nude figure were a particular focus during the Renaissance and later academic traditions of the 17th century. The image of the nude in puritanical America has seen its ups and downs. Nevertheless, painting the nude figure is a basic skill taught in most academic art schools. Most well-trained, serious artists are quite capable of painting the nude figure. despite developing other specialties like landscape, marine, still life, portraiture. The artist is Walter Brightwell, born in a small town in Texas. He had never seen the ocean until he enlisted in the Navy during World War II. After several crossings of the Atlantic, as well as sailing from England to North Africa, he fell in love with the ocean and determined marine and coastal subject matter would be the focus of his work as an artist. This work, entitled Tidal Pool, was a gold medal piece in the early 1970s at an exhibition in New York, and clearly demonstrates his skill as a marine painter and his ability to draw upon the teachings of his art school studies. In addition to Brightwell's career as a fine artist, he frequently engaged in assignments for NACAL, the Navy's Combat Artist Program, recording scenes and events in naval activities. Here is an example entitled Destroyer Man. Walter Brightwell's work is found in several museums focused on nautical and naval subject matter. Surrounded by light and multicolored fabrics, the act of sewing captures a pleasurable moment as well as the execution of normal daily chores. The figure is the artist's wife, who has frequently been the subject of Richard Schmid's art over his extraordinary career as one of the finest artists of our day. Schmid has been described as an impressionist realist, a classical modernist, and granted, these are just words and seemingly contradictory descriptions, yet they do seem to fit. Schmid's accolades, awards, and prizes, published books on paintings, place him at the very top of contemporary artists. Perhaps the most competitive exhibition in recent years is called Arts in the Parks, which draws upward of 3,000 entries depicting scenes of the country's national parks. Schmid earned the first competition's gold medal and the largest cash award for any competition, $100,000. Here we see a happy and unpretentious picture of the artist, or perhaps he's just been informed of his gold medal and cash award.
I don't know what it is when I'm on camera. I just get so turned on. I mean, I know I'm so good looking and attractive. And
Bravo! Bravo! Woohoo!
what?
I learned it from you. I tell my tennis club, don't take
This
yourself
is
seriously.
one happy man.
Next, The Struggle, Women Artists.